I'm Natasha Maidoff, and this is Artist Planet. This is my conversation with Alexandra Dillon, a Los Angeles-based surrealist who paints on found objects. I met her over 20 years ago when we were both living in Venice Beach, California, and discovering who we were as artists.
I'm Alexandra Dillon, and it's December 18th, 2020.
Okay, so I'm Natasha Maidoff, and I'm starting this very new these episodes called Artist Planet. And that's because I'm an artist living on this planet, and I'm really interested in other artists who are living on this planet and who they are and how they survive. And my first guest is Sasha, or otherwise known as Alexandra Dillon. And she's someone I've known you for 25 years. I think we met as you were living on Electric Avenue in Venice, California. And
that's right.
I remember falling in love with this painting you did of a pear, and then I wanted to know everything about you, and I've been following you and interested in your work since then. And so my main question for you and for this video cast or podcast, whatever I'm doing, is who are you and how do you survive? Okay, so this is Artist Planet. Like, how have you survived? And let's start with that.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
With a long journey behind it. And I would say that the way I've survived as an artist has been primarily through persistence. I never gave up. I just never let go. And eventually, I mean, in the last, number of years, it finally has come to fruition that I am a working artist making a living off of my art. Of course, there were sales in between, but there were many, many odd jobs, real jobs that were related to art, jobs that took me into realms that I didn't think I was ever going to go into, like computer animation and web design and graphic design. And, they were exciting roads. They were roads that I may not have gone down if I had been a trust fund kid, which I wasn't. And so I don't regret any of the things that I had to do to survive, because in fact, I think they gave me a skill set that not only informed my work and my present work, but allowed me to become a self-sufficient working artist. I mean, for instance, when I was scrambling 20 some years ago to make a living, I thought, well, I need to understand how to do computer graphics. I need to learn Photoshop. I have to have those skills because I just need them to make a living. But what I found, and they did help me make a living, but what I found afterward is I can apply all of that stuff to marketing my own work now, building my website, doing all my own photography, doing all my own web design. I do everything. I don't hire anybody to do anything, and I haven't for 20 years.
Right.
And so skill building has been a big part of how I've survived as an artist.
That's fantastic. And do you remember how, or the moment when you first realized you were an artist?
I was a very young child. I was probably 3 to 5 years old was when it started to already kick in. By the time I was 5, I already was making collages, drawing. I never was a sketcher. I'm still not. I don't sketch. I really hate sketching. But
Yeah.
I was always a maker. And I started so young, and I was very fortunate because I went to a good private school here in Los Angeles as a child, and I had an excellent art teacher, and art was my favorite subject. And so I was nurtured as an artist in that environment. And so, yeah, it started just from the beginning. And then even though I didn't go to art school for college, I studied film in college at UCLA. I got into that program by submitting an art portfolio.
Oh, wow.
And I'd had no formal art training at any time. And even through that whole period, I was continually painting, doing collage work. I was making boxes at that time, kind of Joseph Cornell style boxes. So it's just something I've always done.
Mm. And were you encouraged by people around you other than your art teacher? Yeah.
I was encouraged, but I wouldn't say that I was encouraged strongly enough. Like, I didn't have a mentor. I really actually have never had mentors in my life. And it's something that I really wish that I had had. I found a few people around me over the years, but I never had somebody who took me under their wing and said, hey, this is how you do it. That never happened for me, unfortunately.
And why did you decide to go from making films to back to visual art?
You know, I had gotten into the film industry, well, I'd studied film because I loved film, but I also had been advised very early in my life that I was never going to make a living as an artist. So if you want to be creative, you better get into the film industry. And so that was what led me really into studying film at UCLA. Once I got into Hollywood and I started to actually have jobs right out of film school, I found I was completely not cut out to be in the film industry. I did not have the confidence. I did not have the bravado. I did not have the kind of cutthroat energy that it takes to be in the industry. I don't think that's what it takes to be a filmmaker per se, or an independent filmmaker, but to be in Hollywood. And so I spent, oh gosh, I guess it was about 6 or 7 years doing all these different jobs, production jobs, art department jobs. I wrote a bunch of screenplays that I was trying to get produced. I worked for a producer for 2 years. And I can tell you what got me out of the film industry, which is actually kind of interesting. I was working for a producer. I won't say his name, but he was really well known for being absolutely horrible person.
Right.
They called him the Screamer.
Oh, my.
He was an old time producer. And I was working in his office, and I was working for a junior producer under him. And I had been reading scripts and doing development for about a year with this company, and bringing scripts home every night and trying to, you know, double work and, you know, all the stuff you do when you're trying to get in the industry. And I was in line for a job. And there was another girl in the office who knew how to manipulate people much better than I did. And I got passed over for that job after a year of busting my butt. And I went to my producer and I said, what happened? And he looked at me and he said, if you want to be in this industry, you have to be like her. And I said, but she was totally unethical and she went around me and she snaked me. And he said, yep. And the next day I turned in my resignation. Wow. And that was it. I never went back into the film business.
It's a tough lesson. Yeah.
That was it.
And so then, so you walk home and you have this, you resigned, and then what did you do? Like, did you say, well, okay, I'm going to go study art, painting and
well, there was a little bit of a gap in between. I was making jewelry at that time also, and I had some silver bracelets, and I went down to Melrose with these silver bracelets that I'd hammered out on my dad's forge. My dad lived in Laurel Canyon, and he had a forge, and he was fooling around with blacksmithing, and I learned how to hammer silver. And I went to this really groovy store on Melrose in the 80s that sold leather jackets and cowboy boots and antique jewelry. And I walked in with these bracelets and I said, do you want to buy some of these bracelets? And the boss said, no, but do you want to come work for me?
Oh,
And I ended up being the manager of this incredibly fantastic store on Melrose for 2 years called Leathers and Treasures. People my age might remember it. And I met rock star after rock star. I mean, the first day I walked in, there was Bruce Springsteen was in the back of the store, and it was like, hey, Bruce, you know, and it went like that for a couple years. And then there was a lot of personal history. I got involved with a guy, blah, blah, blah. He wanted to get married. I wanted to pursue my art career. And so I found a school in Italy that I wanted to go to, because I knew at that time I did not want to study conceptual art. And that was what was going on in all the art schools around town. You were going to go in and, you know, do performance or very conceptual art. And I still wanted to tell stories. I mean, that was part of why I wanted to be a filmmaker. I was interested in character, and I wanted to draw. So I found a classical realist school in Florence, Italy, a place I know you're familiar with.
Yep.
And I sold everything I owned. I broke up with my boyfriend. I sold my car, and I went off to Florence. And I studied there for a year until the money, basically, I just couldn't do it anymore. I found no way to make a living there, even though I was teaching English and other things. But I got enough skills that when I came back, I felt confident enough to keep going as an artist. And so that's how that happened for me.
So when you came back with these skills, I mean, you seem to have an innate talent. You say you don't like sketching, but you were able to like pick up classical style painting. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I found that I could draw, and I didn't even know that until I got there.
Wow.
I had the work that I had been doing prior to that had been kind of cartoonish, and I'd never really tried to draw, like, you know, from life and do representational work. So I got there and found that I could draw a lot better than I thought. And I learned all the techniques of classical realism, and I was very lucky to have some very excellent teachers. And of course, all the beauty of being in Florence and how much I loved Italy was very inspiring. And I wasn't the best student at that school. There were students there from all over the world, and some of them were incredibly talented and just were really good at classical realism. And I was kind of in the middle, I would say. And when I came back from Italy, and this was in the early 90s, I found that I didn't know what to do with all of these skills and be in the contemporary art world. Like, I knew I had figured out already that I didn't have the kind of talent that it took to be a really, really, really good classical realist painter. And I didn't really want to do that anyway. I you know, I wanted to do something more contemporary. So I had to rely more on my ideas than on my skill set. And so pretty much from the get-go, although I was, as you said, you remember I was painting pears, I was painting classical still lifes because I loved them, kind of in the Baroque style, but I was also starting to paint pop surrealism, which was just beginning at that time. It was the time of the Helter Skelter show here in Los Angeles. It was a time where a lot of new artists were coming on the scene, and they were creating some really vibrant and interesting art. And I found myself starting to gravitate into that world. And I started making paintings that had components of classical realism, but they were much more collage-like, more pastiches of different elements. They tried to create kind of oblique but metaphoric stories. And so I worked on a lot of stuff like that at that time, and kind of always circling back to classical realism just to satisfy another part of my soul.
I feel like, I mean, your idea that that's how you took your idea to how to tell stories, you moved it into this two-dimensional form, I mean, well, this visual painting form. And so the stories just kept evolving. And how did you end up finding, I guess I have two questions that I really want to ask. One is like, how did this living in Venice and the environment of LA, you sort of talked about how you were affected by this show, The Helter Skelter, that, but how did living in Venice in this environment affect your work, and in terms of the evolution of your storytelling through your work?
Well, certainly there were a lot of other artists, which was inspiring in itself. But I mean, Venice is character heaven. I mean, if you're looking for, some sort of inspiration for, peculiar characters, Venice, California is a great place to start. And I definitely looked at the people around me. I've always been interested in psychology, even more so now than I was before. But Venice in those days was just like a soap opera of human beings carrying out all of their, strange and beautiful psychologies. And I found a lot of inspiration in that.
What kinds of things do you mean that you saw of that time in Venice?
Well, aside from all of the crazy people on the Venice boardwalk, which was an endless source of fascination, just my neighbors. One of my neighbors was the man who lived next door to me was a cross-dresser with a beard, whom I loved. I mean, he was wonderful. He was just a great character. You know who I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
And, another neighbor was a budding musician, and he looked like a homeless person, but, then you'd hear him on KCRW the next morning, on the radio, and he would be defying expectations. There were stories just in every corner of my neighborhood. And those weren't necessarily the stories I was telling in my paintings. I wanted to, I wanted to be Goya. I wanted to be able to tell, like, real stories in both a kind of reportage way and in a metaphorical way. But that's not really what I was doing. I didn't feel confident enough as an artist to do that. So they were kind of feeding into just made up characters that I did and still do.
Yeah, it seems like there was a kind of freedom, particularly in the 90s in Venice, that was, yeah.
It was great, actually.
Yeah.
It's a great time.
How do you feel like the environment that you're living in now? How do you like, what do you need now in your environment to be a creative person, do you think? What do you need? What are the essentials?
Well, I have been doing this for so long that I'm pretty self-sufficient. I mean, I don't need to draw inspiration from the things around me. I'm very disciplined. I don't wait for inspiration. I learned long time ago how to start, which is the most important thing as an artist. I don't wait for inspiration. I go into my studio and I start, and the inspiration comes. And if it doesn't come, then, it just was a day I hung out in my studio. I don't beat myself up for it. But what I've been doing over, maybe the last 5 years has been working on found objects. And what happened to me was when I got off the canvas and I was able to start working on objects that I found at flea markets and thrift stores, such as tools. I work on shovels, I work on axes, I work on used paintbrushes. I do portraits on used paintbrushes, and I work on clothes. that these objects themselves became the genesis of the piece. So I would find an object and I would say, well, what is it I can do with this? What is in this object that creates a juxtaposition or creates some sort of meaning? And the objects themselves would tell me. And so that's my process now.
It's very
And
similar to filmmaking, actually, because in filmmaking, you need the juxtaposition of two images to create a story or a tale.
yeah,
In a way, you found that in a three-dimensional form.
yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And so that has been just a wonderful way for me to work. I mean, it's been a little tougher since COVID because I don't go to flea markets anymore. I don't go to thrift stores, but there's still eBay.
Right. That's how you do your shopping right now.
I do my shopping on eBay.
So interesting, because my next question was going to be, what do you think is the significance of being an artist?
Yeah, we're the radio receivers for the collective unconscious, and if you get tuned right, you can make it, and it's fun. And when you stop having fun, you know you're not making the right art.
Mm,
You know, that's how I see it.
right.
You know, when it has to be a joyous experience. For me, it does anyway. I mean, I don't know how it is for other artists, but it just seems like if the universe is telling you you're doing the right thing, and I follow that call. And when it starts to be the wrong thing, I go, wait a second, maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing right now. I need to move on to a different kind of art.
And so you never question what's the significance of artists living in the world? Like it seems like we're an unnecessary extra, right? But
I think that our contribution to the whole human saga is incredibly important. And that's why, and we know that as the human race, that's why we build museums, which are temples to art. You know, that's why the richest people on this planet, what do they do with their money? They buy art. Because there is an implicit knowledge in all of us that this is the highest form of humanity. The highest calling is to create, and to create beauty, and to create something that reflects our own highest self back to ourselves. And that's what artists do.
wow, very, very succinctly and beautifully put.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to thank you, Sasha. I think this was a great interview. I mean, I just love you as a thinker and as an artist and as a friend. So,
Thank you, Natasha. The same to you. And I'm thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. And I hope we'll get to do it again in person soon.
That was my conversation with Alexandra Dillon that we recorded in December 2020. This episode was produced by me, Natasha Maidoff, and was edited by Carlos Berg. To see more episodes of Artist Planet, you can subscribe to this channel or follow Natasha Maidoff on Instagram or Facebook.